Good afternoon. Today we are going to do a simple animation that's going to introduce you to some fairly complex stuff in After Effects. Actually, I shouldn't say complex, it just makes things more interesting. Well, remember Illustrator when you learned the pen tool? Or Photoshop where you learned the pen tool? Or maybe Premiere where you use the pen tool? Well, we are going to use the pen tool, and you can see I already have a Bezier curve going here. We're going to use the pen tool to adjust not only position but velocity or speed in our animation. So here's the animation that I currently have going, and I have already created a couple of keyframes here. I have two things going on here. I have a butterfly. This is a very simple animation, and I have its background, a flower field, which I have locked so that I can't move it. So now let's go ahead and play what I have so far. So here comes the butterfly, speeds up, wiggles, slows down, and finally it comes to rest. And it actually keeps kind of wiggling like a butterfly would. All right, let's look at that one more time, then we're going to break it down, and then we're going to redo it. So here comes the butterfly. Notice it goes sometimes a little bit faster, sometimes a little bit slower, and it rotates and wiggles. Now the only thing we need to make it do is flap its wings, which we're going to do in the next lesson, or one of the next lessons. Now let's break down how I did that. All right, so the butterfly itself, if I click on it, I show that I have a Bezier curve, which I created already. And I'm going to show you how I created that when we demo this. But here's the cool stuff. See this little button here? This gives us what's called the graph editor. The graph editor is actually showing me how to graph the butterfly's speed over time. So the higher the curve, the greater the speed. And it'll, as you can see, as I hover over the butterfly, it says it's going at 611 pixels per second. Here he's slowing down to 180 pixels per second, and now he's coming up to 300, 488 pixels per second, dropping down, going slower, going quicker, and finally coming to a dead stop. That is a velocity graph. Now, how do I get that? Well, I click the graph editor, and then I have several options. So I can show selected properties, or I can show animated properties. Okay, so the animation is position, X and Y. So this is pretty simple. We're not animating opacity over time, although we could. And here's what's changing. All right, so the graph editor, next door to this little eye, I'm going to actually just show animated properties. So next door here, I have edit value graph, edit speed graph. By the way, this is also where you can show your audio waveforms when we're editing audio, and not coincidentally, I have an audio track that we're going to add later. Okay, for right now, so we've got the speed graph on here. Now let's look at the value graph. So this is the butterfly's position. Okay, so if I look at these points and I move them around, I can see that it also moves it around here on the timeline. So the position graph is its position in space. I can either move that on my composition here, or I can move it in my graph editor. It's the same thing. So that's the position graph. So I can change that either on screen, on my composition, or I can change that by using this, the position graph. All right, but what I really want is to edit the speed graph. So in the composition, this is the real power of the graph editor, I can edit both position and speed. And I'm going to edit speed now. So as you can see, these are points just like we have points in any Bezier curve. And if I click on them and move them, I change the speed, the velocity. Remember, if I push this up, the butterfly is going to go faster. If I pull it down, the butterfly is going to end up at a slower speed. I can also add and delete points. So here I have the butterfly going faster. Here I have the butterfly going slower, and this graph kind of bottoms out. All right, so I can use the pen tool to add points, to delete points, and to convert points. So I'm going to add a point here, and I'm going to go back to V, the move tool, so I have one more little wiggle here. So my butterfly is going to go at a speed, at several speeds basically. And if I start to mess up here and mix up, as I have here, I have an extra point, an extra vertex. I can also delete points. So I'm going to delete a vertex here. All right, so anything I do, I can of course undo, and I can move these around. So now I'm going to have basically butterfly is going to start out slow, get fast, drop down, get fast, drop down slow, get fast. Okay, so we're making a more dramatic emphasis on the butterfly's speed. Okay, let's watch our butterfly. Here he comes in, coming in fast, pauses, slow, getting towards the flower, choosing which flower he wants to go on, and now he's chosen the flower. Why the heck is he still wiggling? Well, you may have noticed, and by the way, I'm going to revert because I actually liked my old curve better. Okay, so you may have noticed, I'm going to show the speed graph again, that the butterfly has an effect added to it. So here's the butterfly. And as you can see, the butterfly wiggles. So the butterfly wiggles because I've added an effect to it. Okay, so I've added a wiggle for position and a wiggle for rotation. So all I did to do that, you can see my animation presets, is I searched on what I wanted. So I wanted wiggle under behaviors. And I added a wiggle for position and a wiggle for rotation. And that's what gave me my butterfly as we see it right now. Great. Okay, so now let's save and close this project. And we're going to open up the original beginning butterfly project. All right, project for beginning. And now we're going to do it. Okay, so I have this butterfly and I have this flower field. The flower field is locked. And right now I've done one other thing actually that I should show you before we begin animating the butterfly. All right, so I'm going to double click on the butterfly here to bring it into its own editing space to isolate it. And this is called the anchor point. So normally the anchor point would be in the center of a graphic. What I've done is pulled the anchor point down to the butterfly's midsection. And I actually think I'm going to put it on the butterfly's eyes because the butterfly is going to rotate based on what it sees. So that's the point of rotation, the anchor point. Now let's go back to composition, flower and butterfly, and I'm going to start the butterfly off screen. So there's the butterfly off screen. And right now I just have rotation up. I can click P for position, or I can just close and open the whole set. Since I want to do both, I'm going to animate the butterfly's position first. So I have my making sure that I have my keyframe indicator set at 0. I'm going to click the clock, giving me my first keyframe, and at about 15, actually, well, butterflies do fly slow. At about 15 seconds, I'm going to add another keyframe. And at that keyframe, I'm going to drag the butterfly into its final position. All right, so now let's see what we have. We have the butterfly, moving in a slow, very, very slow straight line, kind of painfully slow. And as a matter of fact, I'm not going to pain you anymore by looking at it. Instead, we're going to go to the pen tool. So the pen tool allows me to quickly change the butterfly's position by adding vertexes. So I have pen plus up right now, and I'm going to add 3 points, and then I'm going to use V, the move tool, to adjust their handles. Now, if you haven't worked with Illustrator or haven't worked with the pen tool, I'm actually going to ask you to do a little lesson for me on the pen tool in Illustrator before we work with it in After Effects, because it's much easier to learn in Illustrator. So I'm going to make a path that's wavy for the butterfly, and now I'm going to go back in time. And there goes the butterfly right down my invisible path. By the way, the butterfly is a PNG file. PNGs are by nature transparent, so it was easy for me to find a butterfly that was a PNG on the internet, and since this is a demo, I can do that, and it automatically comes in with that transparent background. So there's my path. So I created it with the pen tool. All right, so I'm going to save as. Instead of beginning, I'm going to call this one during, and we'll start to put in the rest. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to enable the graph editor. So I'm enabling the graph editor, and right now the butterfly is moving at a constant speed. So nothing changes. So these are the vertices that I've put in for the butterfly's position. I also want to animate, so I can animate rotation if I want, but I'm going to stick here with position, and I'm going to adjust the speed of the position. So remember, as I take this down, the butterfly's speed slows. As I push this up, the butterfly's speed increases. So I might want to create those jumps in speed, see? There. So that's very simple. All right. Oh, I just messed up. I need to edit the speed graph, not the value graph. So I'm going to undo a few times. This is me making a mistake on video. And guess what? If you find a mistake that I made on video, you, my friends, are going to get an extra credit point. So we're going to Command Z to the point where we actually have a position graph. And we're going to do that again. So here we are. I'm going to disenable the graph editor. My position, off screen, my position, 15 seconds, on screen, my ending position, on the flower, use the pen tool to add those anchor points, and let's see how our butterfly moves. Very slowly. We might want one more path in there. Or we might just want to change the speed. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go to the graph editor, and we are going to look at the speed graph. So remember, there's a difference between the speed and the value graph. So I'm going to look at the speed graph, and you can see the speed graph, the butterfly is all moving at one speed. Okay, so you're going to notice that some of these points are corner points and some of them are curve points. Again, with the pen tool, I can control these. I can add them, I can delete them, and I can convert them. So this I'm going to give myself both handles here. I just converted that to a corner point, so I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to, what I think I'm going to do is have the butterfly slow and then speed up, and then I'm going to add one more point here so that we get a serious little speed curve happening. So it's going to find its spot and then it's going to go phew and land there. Okay. All right, so we'll have the butterfly kind of do an erratic little speed journey, since butterflies are known to be erratic and not constant in their movement. So there's our value graph. There's our speed graph. And this is all for the position property. I could have the butterfly, I could edit its rotation property too. And I might just do that for the sake of the demo. But now let's go back. So butterfly slows down, butterfly speeds up, butterfly slows down, butterfly speeds up, and there we go. Now that's still not very interesting, is it? Okay, now we're going to add a wiggle. So I'm going to add a wiggle effect. Now if I don't have, I'm going to clear that wiggle effect right there. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to search on the word wiggle. And so I have, if I clear it, I get everything. And if I type in what I want, which I know I want wiggle, I'm going to get all the wiggle effects. So I'm just going to drag the wiggle to the butterfly, rotation and position. Okay, so now I'm going to accept the defaults here. But now here goes my butterfly, and it's having a much more butterfly-ish position, rotation, orientation, and we've also enabled speed so that our butterfly is flying towards its source, and then boom, he hits his spot. Now he continues to wiggle. All right, so that's a bit of an issue with using the effects. If we want our butterfly to continue to just sit there, we would need to do something else. Okay, so you see that? It's continuing to wiggle. This green line represents it auto-rendering in RAM. So the butterfly is going to wiggle until perhaps we extend the path and make it fly off screen, or we trim the composition to fit the work area, or we animate it manually. So that's one inherent danger, I guess, of using effects. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to enable the graph editor. So we've enabled it for rotation. I am going to show you what it might mean to animate using the graph editor, animate rotation, so that we don't have to use the effects of wiggle. Okay, so this effect, wiggle position, wiggle rotation. Oh, hey, I get an error. Yay. Okay, so now here's our default butterfly. Okay, so now let's start scale. Okay, so notice I get red here and red here and green here. Okay, so right now my butterfly is at a set scale, which I can unlock. And if I want to change the butterfly's scale over time, that would make it appear as if it's moving backward and forward in space. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to unlock, and I'm going to go to the graph editor, and I'm going to edit the value graph at this point. So this represents its scale. Okay, I'm going to move forward in time, and I'm actually going to go with the keyframes that I have here. I'm going to add a keyframe, and as the butterfly moves in, I'm going to have the butterfly appear to go down in scale. I am going to put the lock on because it's a little bit too difficult, and to do that manually. And then as the butterfly gets closer to the flower, I'm going to add another keyframe where I bring the butterfly back to 95%, which is where I found it originally. All right, so let's see if that's enough for us to actually get something that looks reasonable. So you can see the butterfly kind of grow and shrink. Okay, I'm actually going to move this 95% so as the butterfly is coming closer to the flower, it appears to grow in size. So the butterfly goes from, at the beginning, 95% size, shrinks down, and then goes back to a little bit over 100% size. Okay, let's see how that looks. So I could use a wiggle scale effect, but I want a little bit more control over that. Okay, now our butterfly decides where to sit. Boom, it's done. Okay, so now let's animate rotation. So starting with a keyframe here where we have the butterfly at a constant rotation, I'm going to move forward in time, and just so we can see this, I'm going to put another keyframe here, and I'm going to rotate the butterfly a little bit. Move forward, butterfly comes onto the screen, add another keyframe, rotate the butterfly back to where it was, add another keyframe, under rotation, add another keyframe under rotation, add another keyframe here under rotation, and then finally at the very end the butterfly is going to have a keyframe that places it square on the flower. Okay, so other than this being kind of slow, you can see how you can manually animate some of those effects. So when he seems to be fluttering in and about the screen. Okay, so in another lesson we're going to make his wings separate, but for right now that is the graph editor. So so let's just review real quick. I can animate any one of these positions, and if I enable the graph editor, I can see them and graph them over time. And I can graph each separately, and it will show me the value of that particular property at any point in time. Okay, so that is the graph editor. So I can show different properties, the selected properties only, all of the animated properties, or I can show the whole set, and I can edit the value graph, or I can edit the speed graph. So for example, if I click on position, remember how we edited the speed graph for position? Suppose we want to edit the speed graph for rotation, have it rotate a little faster sometimes. All right, let's see what that does to our animation. Slow, fast. So what we want is something that is just a little bit random, like a butterfly would when it's finding a flower. There. Okay. So a couple more things I might want to add to this. The thing that's the most obviously lacking is I want the butterfly's wings to flap. Second thing that's most obviously lacking to me is if the butterfly in terms of its scale. If the butterfly is going back in space, we have the butterfly changing shape. If the butterfly is going back in space, I want the butterfly to blur out a little bit. Okay, so those are two weaknesses of this, but what I'd like you to do right now is to practice the graph editor and practice with the butterfly itself, and then practice with any other animation that you can find. So go, be happy, and enjoy the graph editor.